There's a set of notes. I like put a thing on. It was in the email.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. We'll give Rowan a second to join. That's like super crooked. Yeah, thanks for coming. So Mike's going to talk about DC, and then I'd like to show you guys just a little bit on the objective function stuff. I spent a lot of time on that this weekend and like have a first pass implementation that I'm pretty sure needs to be like completely rewritten under the hood, but it like for the first pass through, it gives us a bit of an idea of how we might be able to work with it.
Well, that mark.
So yeah, there's a thing that does something interesting that we probably need to throw out, but that's okay. It's an idea. Yeah.
First flag.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything else you guys want to add to the list for the meeting today? Make sure we have time to talk about it. Okay. So no. Fair enough. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I don't know where everyone is. So why don't we, I'm sure he'll join us. Like, why don't we get started? Mike, if you don't mind, can you share your screen?
Hey guys.
Hey Doug. Just with the Hangouts so that I can see your slides.
Oh, I'm good.
Do you know how to do that? So right here. Cool, and then you can minimize this. And if you want, you can click the hide button. Perfect. Cool. Okay. I'm gonna switch over to Mike's screen.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Who else is online?
Right now we have Gutney. Rowan's gonna tune in shortly.
Oh, where's Goodney?
He is in a computer.
Whoa, it's a magic machine.
You're live, Goodney?
He's
we're-
muted. He's
we're-
muted right now, so that yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so today I guess I'm just going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the survey design stuff I've been trying to do with SimPEG. I guess it's just a little bit of introduction to the problem I've been working on. You guys all know, but so we're working in this underground potash mine. We're about 1 kilometer underground. We have our mine workings kind of. I should put you here, I guess. Our mine workings down here. And basically we have possible water inflow sources above the mine and below the mine, and we're trying to kind of figure out the water's getting in. So if we just kind of look at the layout of our tunnels, we have this very kind of complex geometry, and at the moment they just have kind of like a mostly linear array of electrodes that are kind of laid out along one wall of the tunnel. So I just kind of laid out a very simple synthetic model that kind of mimicked a tunnel environment and put one of these linear arrays along it just to kind of see what some of the limitations were for our ability to resolve conductive anomalies in different locations. So here's just kind of 2 examples that kind of show our limitations here. The one on the right, we just have this 10 by 20 meter conductive block in the center of our tunnel, and it's centered about the tunnel. We're able to recover the location of it pretty well. But as you see on the left, if we just drop it like 10 meters below the tunnel level, we have very little ability to resolve whether it's above the tunnel or below the tunnel, because we get kind of this symmetric anomaly above and below because of the distribution of sensitivities. If we simplify this even further and just start with a straight section of tunnel, and we put 4 blocks around this tunnel, some of them resistive, some of them conductive, kind of one on either side there, and one above and one below, and then we run just a straight linear array of electrodes down the floor of the tunnel, this is kind of the result that we can expect to get out when we invert the data. So it does an okay job of kind of locating the along tunnel location of the anomalies, but it gives you very little information about the around tunnel location of them. We just kind of get this, because of the sensitivities, we get the anomalies just kind of smeared around the tunnel. If we switch to kind of one of these ring arrays of electrodes where we have like one or more electrodes kind of in each face of the tunnel, and then we collect data like within a ring and across different rings, we see that we're able to quite nicely recover the shape and location anomalies. Now this does, I mean, it's much more expensive to do because we have a lot more data, a lot more transmitters, and a lot more receivers, but we do have much better recovery. So now kind of the question is how many of these additional transmitters and receivers are really needed to kind of adequately image our conductive anomalies. And so that's really where SimPEG has kind of come in, because we want to start with trying to answer the question, like, which of these transmitters do we really need? Because the transmitters are kind of what makes the problem more expensive, because each one of them is additional right-hand side that we need to solve the system for. So we're going to start out looking at this from like the perspective of sensitivities, and kind of, I want to kind of get as uniform a distribution of sensitivities around my tunnel as we can, is what we're kind of trying to accomplish. And we're just going to use kind of the SimPEG framework to kind of compute some of these sensitivities and start to kind of, so we're just going to start with this very simple, like, straight section of tunnel. We have 6 of these rings of electrodes, 6 rings of 4 electrodes, like 1 electrode in each wall, in each face of the tunnel. And then we're collecting all possible dipole-dipole measurements between those guys to get 276 transmitters and about 64,000 data. We can do that with pretty decent accuracy on the left there, with about 12 padding cells, and we're sitting at just under 500,000 cells for that mesh. Which is pretty good. I mean, it takes a while to forward model that, and our sensitivity matrices are getting pretty big. So it's a big advantage if we can then turn to more of this octree style mesh, where we have kind of twice the padding distance, but we're sitting at just under 200,000 cells. And if we look at kind of the accuracy of those 2 different meshes, when we compare it against the analytic solution for a full space, we see that the octree mesh, even though it has less than half the number of cells, we see that our median percent difference between the analytic and the numeric is smaller, and we just generally have a tighter spread of our data here at the really low misfit levels, around like half or 1%.
And these are both SimPEG forward models?
Yeah.
Yes, the diagram on the right, we've got, how do I interpret these whisker diagrams again? So the
histogram or the box plot?
The box plot.
So they're showing exactly the same data. They're just showing you the distribution of percent differences between the analytic and the modeled. And so the red line here, which is kind of near the bottom, is the median. This is a 75 percentile. This is a 25 percentile. And then the dashes, I think, are 3 standard deviations away from the median. Those are outliers. So I mean, this kind of shows the full range. So you see we have a couple of measurements that have quite large percent differences, but the vast majority of them are sitting down here around like 0.5%.
Yeah, somehow that outliers catches the eye. It's like,
And
Yeah.
so the vertical spread is different, right? The 25, the other one is 12.
Yeah, so with the octree one, we do have a couple of measurements where we have significantly larger But overall,
Do you get some sense of like which transmitters or receivers that those are coming up for?
well, I mean, I think that's where you're having a receiver extremely close to one of your transmitters. I haven't been able to dig in, I haven't been able to look at all 200 of them yet and figure out exactly which ones it is out of the 60-some thousand, but
It would be interesting to see.
yeah.
What do you compare? What's the number? You know, like and not like full space. Because you're not in full space. You're.
Well, I just had the tunnel. So in this case, I took the tunnel out, just had the full space, and just had the electrodes in the full space.
Oh, okay. So it's basically that memory receiver is in full space.
Yeah. Yeah, for this accuracy check. Yeah.
And your core mesh is sort of like, it's like,
Going out to a similar distance with fine cells. Yeah. 1 meter cells in the full core mesh in the interior, so that we can discretize these 3 by 3 meter tunnels, kind of. So now that we kind of are convinced that our meshes are kind of behaving nicely, and we think that the octree is behaving just as
It's
well.
kind of interesting that you're sort of bimodal,
Yeah,
like both of them, right?
Yeah.
or we
Triangle.
Bimodal, not bi-
yeah, because like they're getting relative difference, right? Sort of.
I mean, it's a percent difference, yeah.
Do you have some floor? Because like there's some data actually should be 0 sometimes. Or you don't have anything? Like,
I mean, I haven't tried to do like so you're talking like converting it into kind of like a misfit in some ways, or
no, I mean like if you actually like if you have 0 data, for instance,
Yeah.
and you compute the relative difference, then your error is infinite. So like
yeah. So I mean, if you look at these large ones, if you look at the distribution of the large data, you see that most of them are quite small values.
Maybe they are spatially correlated. Spatially correlated, like at a corner of particular geometry, like a cross diagonal or something like that. Source receiver combination creating
They could be, and
kind of like a
it,
second peak or.
they could be, and it probably shouldn't be too hard to figure that out.
Oh, so I see. So here you're saying that you're not normalizing by how large your value is. You're
Right.
sitting there.
Just straight
Oh,
percent
that's-
differences.
So you could be in the 1 minus 8. And
Yeah, so these
Yeah.
ones that are coming here at 20%, like the value you're looking at could be 1 to the minus 15 or something.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see these bottom plots side by or stacked with just like absolute difference.
Yeah, that's right.
I have that in some
Okay.
books somewhere.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, without going into a couple more days of analysis on that, I'm not sure.
I mean, I'm interested in seeing if we get this, well into the actually soon, so we're going to see how that can do.
And are you using the self-centered or nodal?
Self-centered.
Self-centered.
Yeah.
Discretization. Okay.
Self-centered problem with Dirichlet, homogeneous Dirichlet boundary conditions. Those are the only boundary conditions that the octree stuff is set up to handle right now for the DC problem. So, but in general, the Dirichlet stuff seems to be, at least with the self-centered problem, the Dirichlet boundary conditions seem to be better in most circumstances.
no problem.
For the
Switch
DC.
to- You switch to nodal. That is fine.
So it seems to be behaving like somewhat reasonably. So now to try to determine what I think like the best transmitters are out of these 276 ones, I just kind of defined a region of interest around my tunnel. Let's say we want to be able to see stuff in the region like 30, 40 meters out from the tunnel in all directions. And I'm just going to take that region and I'm going to divide it into blocks of roughly uniform size. So I have my tunnel,
Yeah.
and I want to be able, my region of interest is everything within a certain radius of that tunnel. So I want to be able to see anything which is within 40 meters, let's say, of that tunnel, maybe. And so I just take that region that I've defined, and I divide it up into kind of uniform blocks. So like this is just a depth section through that region of interest, which is 80 meters like across, right? It's like roughly 30 to 40 meters on either side here. Centered about 0, so it's
What's ROI?
region of interest.
Oh,
And so I just divide this whole region up into 10 by 10 meter cubic blocks. And then once I have this region divided into these blocks, I'm going to compute or approximate the diagonal of J transpose J for each one of my transmitters. And then I'm just going to sum up these kind of approximate sensitivities over each one of the blocks.
So is your tunnel perpendicular to the plane, or?
Yeah, the tunnel, I guess it's not showing up here, but the tunnel runs right through the center.
Oh, okay.
Oh, looking, I see.
what are you looking? Is that the sensitivity or?
This is just a number, a scalar for each block. So like this is block 1, this is block, so just the block number just increases and we have a constant value in each one of the blocks. So that's kind of indexed the cells within each one of my blocks so that I can then go grab all the cells within block 25. And I can figure out, then I can sit there and I can sum my approximate sensitivities over each one of these blocks for each transmitter.
Same question as Deepan, so why are we not seeing the tunnel in the 7x line? Because it should be into the more direct.
But it comes right through the center in each one of these, right?
It's not indexed as something in the region of interest, is that right?
Right. Yeah. So it cuts through right through the center of both of these. And so yeah, that's kind of the key thing that we're just going to sum those sensitivities over each one. So this is just showing you what some of those sensitivities look like for a couple different transmitters. Here we have a transmitter that just kind of goes from the floor to the ceiling of the tunnel. And this is kind of the general distribution of our sensitivity or our model resolution that we have. And it seems to make pretty good sense.
So the sensitivity for all the possible combination of receivers.
All possible receivers, yeah.
That's sensor.
This one is, I believe, yeah. It takes a very long time to plot anything on the octree meshes
Yeah.
with plot slice.
You did compute octree when you're plotting and you're like interpolating back to tensor. Is that what you're doing, or like?
I've done it on both. I've computed the full sensitivities on both, and I've compared them.
Oh,
And they're
so this is actually.
this photo is off of a tensor mesh. It's computed on a tensor mesh, and it's plotted on a tensor mesh. But I've double checked to make sure that the sensitivity that we get off the tensor mesh is comparable with the one we get off of the tensor mesh.
But the current plotting function is increased, so.
Yeah, there's a couple things we need to do. We also need to define, let you predefine axes and things like that. Because right now, what it does is you don't need to be plotting all the way out in your padding, but it's going to do that regardless, and then you can trim afterwards. So, yeah.
So why is it benching? Why is it sensitivity benching? It's kind of moving. Is it because of dipole? It's like a dipole.
You mean two halves, like the upper half and
Yeah,
the
you
lower
see
half?
there's on the plane of the tunnel, there's like a low axis.
Oh, because I see. This transmitter like a vertical dipole.
Yeah.
So it should look like.
Good thing that your sensitivity is proportional to the volume. So, yeah. Like there was 4 kilograms, there's actually the volumes, really bad.
So the bottom two, I can't read the so is one of them sensitivity sort of above the plane of the transmitters and receivers, and then the other one?
So both of these are right through the origin. This is an east-west slice. So this is above the tunnel, this is below the tunnel.
Okay.
This is a depth slice right at 0, right through the center of the tunnel. So right through this region here, right through the area that pinches right in there is basically what that's going through. So here, one of our transmitter electrodes is above us and one of them is below us.
Do you have some conductivity, like a high conductors or like?
No.
Then
That's just a tunnel with a uniform full space around the tunnel,
Then why is it so focused on the left side if you look at that image?
because that's where the transmitter is.
Transmitter number 1, leftmost.
Oh, I see. Oh, right. That's for one transmitter.
So I mean, the transmitter electrodes are over here and here. There's like 20 or 30 meters of tunnel that hangs out past the transmitters on either side.
I see.
Now you see why my version is putting up and down the tunnel.
So it's also easy.
So then here's just another transmitter. This is one that kind of goes diagonally from one end from the left to the right. You can see kind of what your sensitivities are starting to look like there.
It's all that little jitter in between. So
That's-
we have,
That's where some of our other rings of electrodes are.
So were your receivers?
Yeah.
Those be receivers?
Yeah, so that's where our receiver,
Are you summing over all the receivers?
all the receivers for a single transmitter. So that's just what some of these guys that we're looking at, some of these guys that we're summing, this is what they look like, basically. So if we sum the sensitivities for each transmitter over each block, and then we select, for each block, we select the transmitter or transmitters with the highest sensitivities, and we kind of just keep a tally of that. We can go through and we can create a plot that basically shows us the percentage of transmitters with a specific A-B separation that are being identified as kind of one of these important or optimal transmitters. So here we can see that, for example, like all of our transmitters which have an A-B separation of 4 meters, these ones are always like consistently flagged as being kind of our important transmitters. Like all of the separations of 4 meters are always flagged as being as having the highest sum sensitivity for one of these blocks, one or more of these blocks in our region of interest. So if we do,
Is it normalized sensitivity or are you normalizing? Is the values going to be larger, right? Probably. Just because of the geometry of it. But it doesn't mean that you're not sampling the space.
so I mean, normalizing, I'm summing over each block separately, right, for each transmitter, and then I'm just picking the transmitter that had the highest sum sensitivity over that block.
Does that include, is this the same question, the WD matrix? Like, does it include a noise? Does your calculation of the sensitivity include a noise model? Is that what you're asking?
I think the value is going to come in if you have a percent. Because I'm just saying, when you have very small offsets, your sensitivity is going to be, the numbers going to be larger. I would think so, right?
Right.
But it doesn't mean that number is larger, then it's necessarily good for your sampling the space.
I mean, if you have a higher sensitivity in that particular cell from a specific transmitter.
Okay, I guess I don't understand. You're looking at cell better cell per cell basis.
So I'm taking just one of these big blocks and I'm summing up the sensitivities from each individual transmitter over all the cells that lie within that one block.
Yeah.
So if that block happens to be one that's really close to the tunnel and really close to one of our current electrodes, then I agree that the sum sensitivities in that block are going to be higher than a block that's 20 some meters away from the tunnel. But even for the one that's 20 some meters above the tunnel, I'm still just doing a sum over all the possible transmitters for that one that's farthest away, and I'm picking the one with the highest sum out here. So I never have to compare the aggregate sensitivities from one block to another. I'm just selecting either the highest one or the top 10 or the top 5%, or I'm picking some threshold and I'm saying, give me the best X number of transmitters for this block based on that particular block's aggregate sensitivity.
Yeah, but
Does that make sense?
You're not comparing the blocks to each other, you're looking for.
Just looking at each block individually.
So why do you get such extreme variations when you have very small changes in AE?
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I mean, it's indicating, at least the way that I have things set up, these offsets have a higher aggregate sensitivity for the particular blocks around them than these ones happen to. So I mean, the difference may be relatively small, but these ones just have a higher on it.
So is there anything special with respect to an 80s separation of 19 versus an 80s separation of 20 as far as like how things are arranged in your?
Well, if it's an even number, they have to be like perfectly linear along one side of the tunnel. Once they become like 19 or one of these odd numbers, they're a diagonal transmitter measurement of some sort.
So the fact that if they're at 19, they're really co-located along a tunnel, and if they're at 20, then they must be have some kind of a diagonal.
Other way around.
Whatever.
Yeah, because there's exactly 10 meters between each one of these rings. So any transmitter that has an offset of exactly 10 meters, it's just one ring to the next along the same face of the tunnel.
But then just the metric of the separation between A and B, maybe there's something else that needs to be looked at there. You're not taking into account any information about where things actually are as far as the transmitters.
Well, we don't want to though, really. We want to select one separation distance, and we want to try to use all of those transmitters. We want to figure out what are the best separation distances, and we want to use all of those transmitters. Because if we do that, if we use like one of these sets of all the transmitters with the same offset, we're going to build up kind of a uniform distribution of sensitivities down the tunnel. Like if we just grabbed, if we left it be completely random kind of in some ways, like you're just not going to build up your sensitivity distribution uniformly.
Just because we're trying to make sense of it, just at a distance, a relation between distance and sensitivity, but here there's also 3D geometry.
Yeah, so there's lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, and that's why the Jagger is kind of odd, but it's not because it's not a linear separation like this.
Yeah. So, we're just, so then I mean, we also have the whole question of then once we figure out which transmitters are we going to use, we need to decide out which receivers, like which data to actually collect for each one of those transmitters. And I've kind of quickly started looking at like some ways of doing that. One of them was just taking a completely random subset of all the possible receivers for that transmitter and seeing how that performed. Another was kind of a pseudo-random subset where we separate all of the receivers based on their MN separation, and then we randomly select an even number of receivers from each MN bin, so that we're still selecting them randomly, but the distribution is uniform across each bin. And then kind of the third most complicated one had to do with kind of detectability. So basically you have this model and you kind of place these kind of random blocky perturbations to the model, and you look at basically how that affects your data. You forward model just with the uniform full space around the tunnel, and then you forward model with these blocky perturbations to the model, and you see which of your data for each transmitter are kind of the most sensitive to these different blocky perturbations. And then based on that, you can set some sort of threshold to say that I know that my data needs to change more than this value, which is related back to my instrument accuracy or something, like we need to see more than like or we're expecting 5% noise, so we need to see more than 10%. We need to see more than a 10% change in the data, and the absolute value of that change needs to be above 3 millivolts or whatever we're going to set as our instrument floor. And then, so I basically selected out all those measurements which kind of fell above this detectability threshold, and then I've kind of randomly sampled evenly across the different emit bins for that as well. And kind of, I haven't gotten far into the analysis of this, but you basically see that if you have a small enough problem, like doing it completely randomly is probably the best, because you don't get any of the interesting biases from kind of trying to do this more complicated analysis. But if the problem gets big enough, then this one actually starts to perform a little bit better than just the random subset. I don't know for sure why that is yet. I've just done a couple tests on that. And I'd like to be able to do more of that once we actually get the inversion side of things up and running here in SimPEG. And I guess that's the other big thing I need to do once we get the inversion running in SimPEG, is I actually want to slowly build up these kind of subsets of selected transmitters and make sure that the ones that my metric is selecting, kind of make sure that those are kind of an optimal subset of transmitters, and that they do a better job of kind of covering the model than some other subset of them. So I have this metric that I think may be kind of pointing me in the right direction for selecting these transmitters, but I haven't validated it yet, because right now, before we can do any inversion stuff on an octree mesh, we need to get kind of this CellGrad stencil set up, which will allow us to have those derivative terms in our model objective function. Because right now we don't have any of that portion of it set up. So that's kind of one of the next big things that I want to try to look at, so that we can get that up and running. Because I mean, Dom and other people have done a ton of work in the regularization for SimPEG, so there's a lot of really valuable, really powerful stuff there to use. We just need to get some of this base stuff done so that we can integrate all that stuff in.
And that actually shouldn't be too tricky, because it's not actually a true CellGrad that we need. So you can use the face div transpose to basically pick out the right locations and get like the relationships of where things live. Yeah.
It's kind of, there are some details, because like we're in some boundary condition, and that face div is not a right boundary condition. Right,
but what the stencils and what we've done in the regularization is we don't actually go outside. We're only taking differences inside, because we don't care to try and regularize against an unknown boundary.
No, it's like face div is defined on face to cell center.
Right.
So
yeah.
if you actually take the transport,
Yeah.
it's not like.
Right, but if you grab the interiors of that and get rid of the boundary, then we're actually good to go.
Yes. So yeah.
For regularization, not for like actually computing operators, but for regularization.
Yeah.
Because you should end up with the columns of your matrix that is all zero.
I don't remember what are we actually using? Is that I thought about we were setting the Neumann and then using the CellGrad. No. We're using face div.
No, like inside the regularization, we're basically doing like an interior CellGrad. It's not a true CellGrad. You wouldn't want to use it as a differential operator because it doesn't include your boundary conditions.
Oh, you zero it out or something?
Yeah.
Oh, they're just not there.
They're just not there.
Yeah.
We get rid of those rows.
So reduce space.
So just to refresh, so the procedure is basically to populate your tunnel with electrodes on the ground, on the floor, as well as some that are on the,
Yep, so right now I just have kind of one in each face.
right, okay, so you're gonna, those are all your electrodes.
Yeah.
And now, for each one of these, you're going to say, okay, I've got this particular transmitter. Okay, and then you're going to look at all possible receivers
For a given transmitter, yep.
for a given transmitter, and
Compute the sensitivity based on that.
And how are you connecting the receivers? Are they just, you're just looking at adjacent,
So they're all dipole measurements. So it's always a dipole transmitter with every possible dipole.
all possible lengths of dipoles?
Yep. Yep.
And then, so that's a lot.
It's like, in this case, it's just over 200 for each transmitter, I think.
And then you look at a big block outside, it's filled with a whole bunch of small cells, right?
Yep.
And you compute the sensitivities for each of those little cells, and then you sum everything up, and now you've got kind of like an aggregate.
One aggregate value for that block, for that transmitter. Yep, so then if I have 276 transmitters, I get 276 of these aggregate sensitivity values for each block. And I say, give me the top 5% of those. And I say those top 5% are associated with these transmitters. And so then I just sit there and I build up this list of transmitters. So then if I'm taking the top 5, let's just make it easy. Let's say I'm taking the top 10 transmitters from each one of these blocks. And I think in this case I had 640 blocks or something around my tunnel. I then had 6,400. I had a list that had 6,400 transmitters in it, and I just take the unique of that because there's only 276 transmitters. So there's many different blocks which are selecting the same transmitter as kind of the best transmitter for that block. So then you get down to your reduced kind of subset of your selected transmitters.
So that reduces then the number of transmitters that you're going to use. And then what about the receivers?
So then the receivers, like there were those kind of 3 methods that I just like barely started looking at to try to figure out. Right now, for the transmitter portion of it, I'm just assuming we're using all of the receivers. And once we get kind of our subset of transmitters that we want to work with, then we can start to decide, well, like feasibly, like how many data do we actually want to collect? If we think we need to use 100 transmitters, and we only have time to collect 60,000 data, then we know that there's kind of a limit to how many data we can collect with each transmitter. At this point, I think I would just kind of evenly divide those number of measurements among each one of your transmitters, and then try to figure out if you want to like do the pseudo-random selection of the transmitters that are kind of evenly distributed across different image separation links. If you want to do a completely random version of it, or if you want to try to do some of that kind of detectability analysis that I was doing, where you say, I think these are the measurements which are going to be most sensitive to some sort of a perturbation in my region of interest, and out of those I'm going to randomly select which ones I'm going to use. So I mean, I think based on the size of your problem, it looks like each one of those has kind of different merits based on the very rudimentary trials I've run of that. So then I guess like the ultimate thing, like the kind of goal, like if we could accomplish something out of this, like what we would kind of hope to be able to accomplish, it'd be nice if we could just kind of develop a relationship. No worries. It'd be nice if we could kind of generalize a relationship that said, or that connected our selected A-B separations with some of these other parameters that we're choosing, like the size of our blocks, or the separation between our electrode rings, the overall length of our tunnel, our region of interest, how far out from the tunnel we want to look, and then I'm assuming that the conductivity that you choose for the full space around you is also going to affect all of that. So it'd be nice if we could say, like, we're given a 100-meter section of tunnel. We know we want to be able to identify things within 30 meters of our tunnel. And we think we want to, or the general size of our possible conductive anomalies is 5 meters or something. So maybe we want to have a ring separation on the order of the scale of the type of structure we want to be able to measure. So let's say we want to have a ring separation of 5 meters along this 100-meter tunnel. Then hopefully we can kind of develop a relationship that gives us some idea of which of those AB separations we're actually going to be interested in. Because right now I've done it with, I guess I've done this, I've run the same, I've taken my standard like 60-meter section of tunnel, and I've had one electrode ring every 10 meters, or I've had one electrode ring every 5 meters. And when I run through this analysis, for the most part, it's showing me that both of those are kind of pointing to the same AB separations that you'd want to use. There's, for the finer 5-meter one, there's like two of these offsets that don't exist in the 10-meter one that it's suggesting might be good ones to use, but all the other ones are exactly the same. So it seems like there's a lot of overlap there, even though I've halved my ring separation. Like, it's still kind of pointing me to the same base transmitters, so that it's kind of indicating do an optimal job of exciting this region of interest around our tunnel. So I think there's definitely some correlations that we can draw there, and maybe even it'd just be nice to be able to come out with like a template for it, so that you don't have to go through this type of huge sensitivity analysis every time you wanted to design a survey that was running up and down one of these tunnels. You're just like, I know if I have my ring separation is this, my conductivity of my background is roughly this, and I want to see roughly this far, then like these are the separation distances that are really going to be important for me to have a fairly uniform distribution of sensitivity around my tunnel. And then if we can do that, maybe we can then even move back to a more complicated example like that horseshoe-shaped tunnel that I showed at the beginning, or just two parallel tunnels, where you say you do that, but I had another slide, but where you have basically that uniform distribution of sensitivity around each one of your tunnels. So you essentially do this straight tunnel design along each one of your straight tunnel segments, and then you populate the area in between your tunnels with some of these blocks as well, and limit the transmitters that you're looking over to be like cross-tunnel transmitters, to try to pick out this additional subset of cross-tunnel transmitters that you then want to add to your two long tunnel ones, to kind of optimally sample that region in between the tunnels. So that would be kind of like, that's the kind of natural progression of it that I'm seeing. I'd definitely be interested in any ideas that you guys have or any thoughts about that. But yeah, right now I guess I'm just trying to figure out the simple straight tunnel. And I guess this just kind of shows, these are just kind of some what I thought would be some interesting discussion points that we could talk about related to the use of the octree. At the moment, for all the meshing and modeling, I'm still using the UBC kind of executables, the utilities that Roman has created. So I always create like my conductivity model on like a base tensor mesh of like uniform cells. And then I take that and I put that in to like I create a base octree mesh, and then I put those conductive structures into that octree mesh using the 3D model to octree utility.
And so that builds you an octree based on conductivity contrasts?
Yep.
Okay.
So the base mesh basically creates this octree mesh for you, which is dependent on where you have electrodes.
Yeah.
And then when you pull in that conductivity model, then it does refine around all the conductive structures in your model.
Yeah.
So that the edges of them don't shift around on you.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of interesting functionality there. Like you can set kind of different. You can control basically how quickly your cell size expands away from the places where you have electrodes. So you can say, I'm saying all my electrodes are in this core area. Like I want to make sure that I have at least 10 or at least 20 fine cells adjacent to each one of my electrodes.
Mhm.
And then I want to make sure that once I coarsen one level, I want to make sure that I have at least 5 or 10 cells within that next layer. You can have like 3 tiered layers to kind of control how quickly your cells expand on you.
Are you using only cube cell?
Yeah.
No, just because I had like many problems when I was trying to have a rectangular elongated cell without 3.
Okay.
So just
Yeah.
to make sure that don't do that.
Okay, that's good to know. I've never played around with that because I've always wanted like 1 meter cubic cells in my core region.
Yeah, currently SimPEG doesn't even support non-cubic cells. There's not really any reason for that other than it was just a simplifying assumption. So we'd have to go in and fix a few things under the hood for that.
No, but even with the UBC codes, when you have an elongated cell without 3, it's creating huge artifacts of like so it's not really useful.
And then Thibaut and I have both done a bit of work looking at just boundary conditions for the DC problem. So like I said, for this particular instance with the octree stuff in DC, we are using a homogeneous Dirichlet boundary condition, and that seems to be, even on the tensor side of things for this problem, homogeneous Dirichlet seems to be more accurate than the Neumann for the self-centered approach. So at some point, Thibaut and I will find the time to hopefully write up kind of some of the analysis that we did and get that somewhere where other people can look at it.
That'd be fantastic.
And then I guess just like some bottlenecks that I've kind of noticed in the whole process. Getting your operators is incredibly slow, and I don't know if there's really much we can do about that. Because it is way more involved to get those operators off of the octree mesh than it is off of one of your tensor meshes. But I mean, it does take like for this 200,000 cell octree mesh, it takes about 3 minutes to get the operator, and it takes about 8 seconds to do the forward problem. So
once you have the operator, that's just
Yeah.
the solve. Okay.
Yeah. So the solve for 276 transmitters is 8 seconds.
What was the size of the mesh for like
200,000 cells.
So the example that you used, an 8 second for like all of your sources or like?
Yeah. I think so. I could go back and check that for you.
And it's probably one transmitter.
It's not that. It's pretty quick to do the forward modeling. I think that I'm not positive. I'm not positive, but I think that is coming from. Yeah, I don't know. You may be right, Soggy. That may just be one transmitter.
Yeah,
I don't.
So if that's 200 transmitter, that would be amazing. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, no, I think you're
Your
right.
inversion is going to be pretty fast.
I think you're right, Soggy. I think that probably is just one transmitter.
Yeah.
So
well,
one forward problem with one transmitter is probably 8. I can check on that for you, but I think you're probably right. I think the forward modeling with one transmitter is probably 8 seconds.
That's all. It's not that fast. Like something that I thought it was almost free, but it's not free.
Why is that?
Because once you factorize, we usually think factorize like it's heavy bang, but the back substitution is fairly inexpensive.
And then right now, anything that uses this git interpolation matrix on the octree stuff is pretty slow. Like using plot slice to plot and slice through your model could take as long as getting the face getting your operators from the mesh. It could take 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah, for one of your figures to come up.
Interpolation definitely needs to
So is
work.
a cross slice a command in math?
It's just a function within SimPEG. It's
Specifically using that or a package from?
It's part of the mesh.
I mean, it looks at matplotlib, which is a standard plotting library in Python, and just like based on your mesh parameters, it's smart enough to know what plotting something should do. So, yeah, it's basically just a wrapper.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, so we're approaching 11. Does anybody have last questions? Or I'll give you the 2-minute version of what's happening with regularization. Putney, was there anything you wanted to jump in and say?
No, I just think it's really cool work and fun to see what you can do, Mike.
Cool. Okay, so thanks, Mike. It's very exciting to see somebody pushing on Octree and also a lot of the interpolation and stuff that we know needs some love. So it's good to get some motivation.
The sensitivity is running, like JVAC is running. With Octree.
Yep.
The probing method again?
So I mean, I've tried both. I mean, I've tried I can do both. I can compute the full thing, or I guess I usually form like fully formed J transpose, or use the probing method to approximate it. And a few iterations of that probing method, I can get pretty similar results out between like the full and the probing solution as far as which transmitters it's selecting, which is encouraging. Yeah. I mean, especially once your problems are getting bigger. Yeah. So which is nice because that should give us the ability to use this on some pretty hefty problems.
I should probably, I'm gonna steal your cord if you don't mind. And Mike, if you don't mind, I'd love to get a copy of your slides and we can post that like with the video. So everybody can see them. Cool, okay, so what we've been working on a bit with regularization, and this is building towards the being able to do joint inversions and have composable objective functions. And so we've gone through and written a very rudimentary base objective function class. And so the goal is to basically, at some level, not treat data misfit or regularization as different things. Right now, they're treated very distinctly in SimPEG. And I mean, there's absolutely good reason for making a distinction between them. You're thinking about different parameters, you're defining a noise model in one. And so there's for sure some distinction, but at their core, they're actually just an objective function. And we should be able to add them and treat them as if they were the same thing. And so, yeah, we've got a rudimentary implementation of composable objective functions. And then I've gone through and tried to see what that might look like in regularization. I haven't touched data misfit yet. And there's some interesting stuff coming to light as we're looking at all of this code, because most of this has not actually undergone another iteration. It is as it was originally written, which is fine, but you learn things as you go. So there's some stuff that has come to light, and Butney, I'm sure you have comments on the data class, which yes, is coming to light as I'm looking at that. So what we want this to be able to look like is if I'm just going to create, we have some sort of mesh. And so the way we would often create regularization is if we've got some sort of Tikhonov. So in this case, we're gonna give it a mesh. And we would maybe give it alpha values. So let's give it an alpha S. Actually, I'm going to define these above. And then let's do an alpha X. Let's do 2 and an alpha Y is 1. Okay, and so we'll define these. Alpha S. And then we'll do that for Y as well. Okay, so now we have a regularization. Before we had the methods eval, eval_deriv 2, or no, eval_2_deriv. Those have now changed. So now we have deriv and deriv2. And then to get like what we had as eval before, it's actually just callable. So if we have M is if we have something and this is our number of cells, now what I can do is just do this. So I can just evaluate phi. I can treat it as like a mathematical thing. So the Tikhonov regularization still is behaving as like you expect.
So it's actually like do a reg.eval, like before you usually put like that as a regularization. So
yeah, so sure, this is still, I mean, we could call this reg,
it
right?
doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
so like actually it's not we're doing format eval.
There is no more, it's actually doing this. So we've hidden the eval. But yeah, wanted to treat it more like a mathematical function. So when you're looking at it, it is just behaving like that.
Then what do you do for derivative?
Oh, it's just computing the deriv as you would expect.
So find out derivative, is that like then it takes n?
Yeah. Oh, phi 1.
Nice.
Okay. And so what's nice about this is now the base objective function now has a dot test. So it'll test the deriv and the 2_deriv, just like mappings. And then I want to show you what I mean by composable objective functions. So if we do this, so alpha S, bracket here. And then this is now smooth X. So now this is now an objective function. So I can treat it the same as I would do the Tikhonov regularization.
Can you set like those three as a different entity and then like sum that out as well? Is that sort of things?
Yeah, so like these are actually each instances of a regularization. And now I'm summing them together and calling that my objective or my regularization here. So they're composable things. So if I wanted to go in and add a new, I don't know. You can do. And so.
So like, is it going to assume that my mesh is all the same, or like, is it?
No.
So can I use different mesh?
Yeah. So each of these can actually be like constructed completely independent of one another. And so there's some assumptions you really have to be careful when you're doing that. And so right now there's not enough error checking in place to sort of like make sure that, for instance, if I tried to update the mesh on this guy, right now it would go through and update the mesh on all of them. So there's some just like, we need to be careful how we handle sort of updates on a lot of things. And Dom, your stuff with the IRLS, like, is very good for sorting through these things. Because you need hooks into every single piece, which was not something I was initially anticipating. So we need to be careful how we go in and do those updates.
Yeah, so
But
you call only one portion.
yeah. So right now this is it's a combo objective function. And so you can go in and see like what it's made up of. And so we can call that, yeah. And actually you can already do that with 5.1 as well, because it recognizes the way Tikhonov is currently built is basically saying like, hey, Tikhonov is actually a combination of these things. So, yeah. And then like this guy is then again testable. Which is great. So, yeah, and so it is cool because now you can start thinking of the only thing that matters basically between these is that they all take the same size of incoming inputs. So they all need to be able to take a vector of length, number of parameters, and be able to do something with that. But if you want to interpolate every single one of them onto a different mesh with like a different mapping and all that kind of stuff, you can do that.
Yes. Is that taking us closer to the joint version? Because right now, like, this is pretty much sort of formatting.
Yeah, because let's give some thoughts, like, because now it actually takes the same M. But it's sort of your thoughts like that, and the different like connectivity 1 and connectivity 2, for instance.
So then what I would do there is give them different mappings. So if I want to, this won't run, but I'll show you sort of what my thought would be there, would be that we have some, if we're doing a joint version with like gravity and conductivity or whatever. So if we're inverting for density and we want a smoothness, then what I would do is, if we're doing them on this, let's just assume they're on the same mesh. And so then my mapping would then just be a row map. And then what I would do is then here, this can then just be a B schema.
But hold on, here, let's see what we have, 2 constants here. So, I think you're talking about mapping to grab the right model.
Yeah, so, but I think you can use wires. So that's fine, yeah. Because what the wire does, let's say you have sigma and then you can connect that with wires, and what it does actually make a zero matrix for stuff. Like when I get to like it's zero, actually solve each model.
Yeah, so like everything takes the regularization, well, and for your data misfits as well, everything takes your vector m. But then, as Sagi was saying, if you only actually need the first 10 parameters of that, then you just make sure that this map grabs the first 10 and then does whatever you want with
The
them.
wire is going to be broken.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool, but still, it probably would do a little bit more.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so this is,
Probably enough to dive in.
Yeah.
Structure.
Get an example on
yeah, it's like not, I need to sort of chat through the implementation. Because I think the way it's implemented right now is there's a few dangerous pieces for updating parameters. Like for instance, if you want to update your mref and things like that, like so in this case, you want potentially a different mref for your smooth row map and your sigma map, and so we need to be careful about how we go in and update those kinds of things. Yeah, yeah. Actually, yeah. Huh. Yeah.
Like, kind of, probably having, like, main specific goal, like, good, because, like, it's good to have a general structure first, but having one application.
Yes.
Kind of, like, narrow it down and you can actually see what needs to change actually.
Yeah. The sort of the two examples that I have in mind right now are the stuff you're doing with IRLS, and then Craig and Darcy's ask to do MT and density joint.
I was thinking easier.
Yeah.
One susceptibility and susceptibility.
Yeah, sure.
Something.
Same space.
Right, yeah. I guess like, yeah, for a first example, absolutely. I guess I'm just trying to sort of build towards making sure that the hooks are there and that, yeah, but starting with. Yeah, so it's still, we can wrap up here, and if you guys want to chat further about this later, we sure can.
Yeah, I think sort of one more like, well, backward inversion type syntax first.
Well, what's cool about that is then here, all you do is make your alphas a directive. And so you turn it on and then you turn it off.
Yeah.
And then, so you can do the coordinate descent basically. Say for this iteration, I'm going to do alpha S, or my like gravity is on, turn it off, do MT on, turn it off, and basically do that.
Yeah, I think.
Can you multiply? Like, do you have alpha being actually a directive multiplying regularization?
That's,
What is that?
yeah, it should. I don't think all the pieces are in place for that yet, but it actually shouldn't be hard to do.
I thought directive were just this, like the inversion class.
Yeah, but in this case, like these guys should be able to be directives. So like if we do beta cooling, beta is just a directive, but I want to be able to say beta times phi m.
Yeah.
And so treat it as a mathematical entity, even though it actually changes. So that would be how I would go about cooperative. Cool. All right.
Way better than sending it. Read it.
Yeah. Cool. So for next week, oh, Gutney, were you able to see that screen? Or was I not screen sharing?
You were not screen sharing.
Oh, can you turn him up? Hey, Goonie, are you there?
And you're
He's talking.
Sorry. Did you actually see that, or that wasn't screen
That
shared?
was not screen shared, but I know what you were talking about. So.
Okay, I will put a picture of that with the video. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, so for next week, do you want to talk about IRLS? Oh yeah, papers, yes.
It fell through it, man, I don't know if it happened.
Yeah,
Sucks, but,
There are lots of journals.
have you written yours?
I've got some stuff down. I have not heard back from Sergey. So I'm sort of unsure as to like if they'll actually consider what we're thinking.
I think I've said it wasn't a clear shot.
Yeah, because I mean the practices paper is like it's a different style of thing for geophysics. So yeah, I'm unclear on what they would think about that. How far off do you think it's too far off to?
I haven't started.
Okay. And it is, yeah. Okay.
Let's do it again in December as well, right?
It's due December 1.
Oh,
So in like
forget
2
about it,
weeks.
no.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess.
Okay.
And this guy's leaving.
Yeah. Let's like keep it in the back pocket and we can pull it out at some point.
He'll come back.
Yeah. Because it's something we could easily, I mean, it could either go to geophysics or computers and geoscience or, yeah.
It's a good plan.
Yeah.
Time-wise, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's fair. So.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, yeah, I'd really appreciate like hearing your thought process on like what's going on in the directives and like what's changing where and what kind of hooks you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you have it all. Because when I saw the eval, it's coming like eval the function, remove it, eval it again, remove it.
Yeah.
Is it storing here when you do your when you do FIAM?
No, I didn't. So none of the W matrices are stored right now, which I think is kind of nice. So it stores your parameters. So like your cell weights are stored, your epsilons, and all that kind of stuff. Those are all stored. But yeah, I'm not actually storing any of the W matrices. So you don't have to go in and clear those.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And what's also kind of cool right now is the phi's, there's no more like W small, W X, da 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 da. There's just every regularization has a W. One W. Which is nice.
Because it only looks at one value.
Yeah, yeah. But then what's like a little subtle with the sparse stuff is when you go and update like epsilon R, or sorry, epsilon P or epsilon Q, it needs to not only hit the sparse, it actually has to propagate through all of the pieces that compose that. So that is something that we need to be careful about, how we actually propagate changes when you hit sort of the composed objective function. So yeah, hearing like what you're updating where and why would be huge.
Yeah. It's a bit dirty right now. A little like lots of code every now and then, right? Just to delete, deallocate, reallocate.
Yeah.
And speed up, it's not a big issue for you, because before they were stored, right? The value matrices were all stored.
Yeah, I haven't actually really looked into. I mean, for the most part, they're diagonal matrices.
Yeah.
The regularization mesh pieces are stored, and those are actually going to be the most computationally expensive. because it's like building an interpolation matrix, or if you're doing octree, it's like building your operators. But like hitting that with a diagonal matrix is cheap. So I don't think we should see a performance hit. Cool.
Can we do it on, when do you want to?
That's a bit up to you. I mean, we could do it at the meeting next week and just
I can,
do that. But if there's stuff you want to go into before that, we can. Sounds good. Cool. Thanks, guys. Nice work, Mike. Thank you for your presentation.
Talk to you guys.
Cool.
Have a good evening.
See you again.
Talk to you later. Cheers.